Hello, Nadeem.
Hello, Jeff.
Nadeem Mazen is a graduate of Phillips Academy and MIT. He was a member of Occupy Boston, founder of the nonprofit Jetpack. He is a Cambridge, Massachusetts city councilor and is now a candidate for the United States Congress in Massachusetts' 3rd District.
You got it right. You got it all right. There's more. There's more exciting stuff, but you got the important stuff.
I got the good stuff.
You got the good stuff.
Nadeem, welcome to the Lincoln Review podcast.
Thank you. It's an honor.
I'm sure it is.
And a privilege.
All right, well, let's get the good stuff out of the way first. You were running for the 7th. Now you're running for the 3rd, correct? And I don't want to harp on this.
No, it's fine. For a split second, we did an exploratory, and I sat down with Mike Capuano before really exploring the option thoroughly, and I said to him, and I'm sure he can confirm this if you want to reach out, my goal is not to run against you, actually. It's to talk about mobilizing underserved communities, longtime Democrats, and others. We agreed to an extent I did not expect on the needs of the state and the needs of that district, as well as the needs of the Democratic Party. And I came out of that discussion believing that we would work together. I think we said as much in the meeting, and that was well before the Tsongas seat came up. So I kind of left my council role earlier this year thinking that I would focus on community organizing. I left that meeting confirmed that I would focus on community organizing. I have continued to organize in Massachusetts' 3rd District, by the way, over the last couple of years in several different ways. To have this seat come up at the time where I'm doing a lot of nonprofit organizing and a lot of training of individual candidates all over the country is, I think, a really surprising timing for me, but pretty apropos timing.
So you weren't talked out of it by Congressman Capuano or anything
I think
like that,
he will confirm that the first words I said when I sat down were my preference would be not to run against you. And while I think there was a little upsurge when that Globe article came out of people who either from his side or independently said definitely run or definitely don't run, I wasn't particularly swayed until I looked at the nature of the organizing that could be done in his district. And I think the nature of that organizing is pretty substantial. And I think he and I both agreed that it would need to happen through congressional leadership, leaders at that level coming back to their districts to do more organizing at the grassroots level, and through non-congressional leadership that is not so substantive in many of the neighborhoods in Massachusetts.
Okay. So you've mentioned organizing quite a bit.
Yes.
So what are you organizing for? I mean, I know I have a bunch of questions, but
sure.
I imagine they're around the issues that you're running on for the Mass 3rd, right?
Sometimes it's the issues I'm running on, but in many cases it's also the issues that just people want to plug into. So you go
Such as what?
Well, you go into a community and, you know, it might align with my issue. It might be about the housing affordability crisis. But you might go into a community, as we have here in Cambridge, as we have in the Massachusetts 3rd District, as you have all over Massachusetts, and a group of moms say, hey, we're Mothers Out Front. We believe in the importance of the climate discussion, not just at the federal level, but at the local and state level. You say, great, what are you doing to plug in? And they say, well, we're new and we want this and that to happen, but we'd love to engage with you on how we send that message to other mothers, or how we send that message to government. And for me, it takes weeks of training to get a new individual organizer or a new group off the ground, or in the case of something like Mothers Out Front, where they're already getting great momentum, it takes a little bit of time to figure out how you can, as a leader, plug into and aid that movement. So that's what I mean by organizing.
Okay. I'm going to check on something technically, but I want you to answer a question.
Sure.
This is not a fancy podcast right here.
Okay.
What are they? Okay, we're good. What, you know, so you mentioned climate change, but then why run for office if you're going to be doing primarily organizing? So I'm trying to get to, you know, the policy issues. You know, I ran for United States Congress a few years ago. So I've done that. I know the candidate speech, and you want to get to not speech but you're running it. So you brought it up an example of the mothers that you're helping to organize, but your whole
they're helping me, but sure.
Okay. However way
you know what I mean?
it,
they're leading. There's other groups
Sure.
that need more help, and they're not leading, and they want training.
But it's for a purpose, right?
It's for a purpose.
It's for a purpose.
Each group
for
has
an
their
issue.
purpose
For
for their
an issue
neighborhood.
to pass a law to change the way we're doing something,
Or
now,
just
and-
to recruit more people to be involved about the decisions being made about and for them by government that they never realized were happening just down the street. You go down to City Hall, you see a discussion happening, sometimes the outcome will shock you, and you say, I bet you that the majority of this community, if engaged in this decision, would have sent that discussion in the other direction. But because we're not here, we're not getting common sense outcomes.
Okay.
That's what I mean by organizing. And I think
Fair
it's
enough, but
inextricably linked from the policy you want to talk about, because we're not getting the policy outcomes we want. And in many ways, when Bernie or Trump or Clinton talk about the system being rigged, they're talking about the difference between what we know in a bipartisan or nonpartisan way must happen for America to succeed and what's actually being achieved in Congress.
Well, I think that's the difference where it comes down to what people see is a definition of success.
Okay.
So what's your definition of success in terms of these issues? Is it getting more people involved? But eventually there has to be a legislative proposition put forward
Sure.
that changes something. So, I mean...
We can talk about what those are.
Yes, so that's what I'm trying to get at, is
Sure.
to what those are.
Sure.
So, I mean...
But we can also...
I understand, the community organizing, and one of the things on, your website is a lot of social justice, but I want to define that.
Yeah.
On your terms.
Great.
What we're talking about, and being specific in what laws we want to change and
Sure.
how we want to govern ourselves.
Let's talk about it.
In those things. So I mean, what's number one on your list? Why are you running? Because clearly you're running for Congress.
Yes.
To go there, to change laws, and maybe on behalf of the people you're organizing for,
Sure.
or be a voice for them.
Sure.
What is that voice? What are you trying to
so
do?
the
and
number
why?
the number one
And what's backing
thing
that
for
up?
now, the number one thing for Massachusetts 3, the number one thing for the future is that America is not poised to be a leading economy in the future. We're the number one economy today, and I don't think that most Americans, I don't think that most politicians are ready to wake up 20 years from now and have every single job in America go to bed asking, what does China want for breakfast? The largest economy in the world by number of consumers. Incredible buying power in their middle class. Remember Japan in the 80s? China is experiencing a renaissance of product design, manufacturing, employment, pulling people out of the lower class and into the middle class.
Yeah, but there's a lot of problems with what China is doing. But
I'm not.
We can get back to that
I'm not
later.
disputing the problems that you want to talk about, or that anyone wants to talk about, because I'm not here to talk about how great China is.
Right.
I'm here to talk about how we have not invested in education. We have not invested in small business growth. We have not invested in veteran-owned, women-owned, minority-owned businesses. We have not invested in the future dynamism of our economy. And frankly, we haven't invested in the workforce that's about to get automated out of a job.
So the first one you mentioned was education.
Sure.
How much has federal spending or state spending or any spending on education gone down by in the past few decades? Because to my knowledge, it's only gone up.
Yes, but for me, it's not about spending. Cambridge is a city.
That's good.
Cambridge is a city that spends 3 times the national average per capita, and we're not getting the equity of outcomes or the job preparedness that I would argue that any city needs. So coming from a city
Why?
that's done well, let me tell you why.
Okay.
First of all, I think we're trying to improve teaching of the past, and I think we're using data-driven ideology that's not working for teachers and it's not working for students. We all want data. We all want to be data-driven. But when teachers are forced to teach to the test, and when funding is accrued based on locality, and when funding is accrued based on test performance, there's all kinds of perverse incentives to game how we're testing, how we're performing. What we should really be talking about is paying teachers more like the high-performing educational systems of Northern
it's a matter
Europe.
of teacher salary that
You just got the thumb. You just got the
educational
thumb. There's
performance.
so many other factors, right?
Okay.
It's a complex and nuanced issue. I'm saying it's not about increasing or decreasing funding. I'm saying it's about a collection of factors that educators are very clear on. There's no question, there's no debate in the academic literature about what will cause America to thrive. There's no debate. And yet we don't implement the things that we know work in a public school setting.
I think there's some debate.
Is there debate about needing equity of funding and equity of opportunity in order to bolster the strongest economy, or should we just allow different localities to have totally different outcomes?
No, I don't think there's debate about equity of opportunity.
Is there a debate about teacher salary relating to outcomes and performance? And master's degrees and training and professional development standards and opportunities?
You're talking about level of education compared to salary? I mean, salaries have gone up for teachers over the past few decades by quite some. And specifically here, you mentioned Cambridge. So Cambridge is a good example. It's a very wealthy city. The teachers are paid very well. They're compensated very well with good benefits and good salaries. As I mentioned before, the education funding for both federal dollars, state dollars, local dollars, the curve only goes up in the past probably 3 to 4 decades. So increasing teacher salaries. I mean,
increasing teacher salaries, and I'm also talking. And by the way, not teachers everywhere aren't experiencing the Cambridge standard. They're not experiencing it in Massachusetts 3rd District. Not experiencing it all over Massachusetts, and the disparities in the Massachusetts 3rd District are a result of both our educational funding and our educational standards. But potentially more importantly is the fact that teachers, I think, need to be given the opportunity to innovate and rewarded for innovation, and they need to be given the opportunity to extend their own professional development.
And what's preventing that, though?
Well, for example, a study has recently shown that in education, when pre-kindergarten and generally pre-primary educators are given more scientific and technology literacy, the outcomes of those students longitudinally over time is improved. And yet,
for pre-K.
I'm saying that science
I'm
saying in pre-kindergarten that is when the tech literacy of teachers begins to be important, incontrovertibly, by the way, and we have not yet invested in that way. We have teachers who yearn for that professional development, and we do not have a federal program for that type of training.
Do you think there needs to be a government program that dictates?
Saying teachers need to be given the opportunity to improve their standing, improve their teaching, and that, yes, the government should be funding better teaching for teachers who are motivated to do so.
Well, is it a lack of funding, or they're not allowed to teach the way that, in a dynamic way that what you're talking about? What I'm getting to is because I think there are a lot of rules set up in current public school systems that prevent teachers from doing a lot of the things you want to.
We have to agree on that for sure.
Okay, but who are those rules set up by? Who backs those rules? And we get into a lot of the teachers' union stuff, and we get into a lot of, we do.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm
talking about race to the top. I'm talking about No Child Left Behind. I'm saying our federal programs, as if someone running for Congress, our federal programs are not in line with data around education. We could be talking about any other subject. You and I would agree that we need to have better and different rules, but we'd probably disagree about the fact that we'd also need a certain amount of funding in order to make those individuals, workers, educators shine in their roles.
I would argue that sending money to Washington to be filtered through a federal bureaucracy and then sent back to Massachusetts or any state is probably counterproductive in that, and with rules attached to that money. So you mentioned several programs that I think the track record of the success of that program is spotty at best, but that money comes with strings attached, and those strings may prevent some of the more creative ways that teachers might be prevented by. Potentially. And you look in Boston, you look in Cambridge, the schools that have more success that get away from the public school doctrine are the charter schools, and a lot of folks that get into charter schools. So
listen, there are some great charters out there, but I say that the idea of privatizing education, reducing funding, and trading a little bit of flexibility for a lot of perverse financial incentives is not worth it. I'm not going down the road of starting to fund private charters and for-profit charters.
I'd be willing to double the funds if a parent could have the choice to choose where they wanted to send their student, their child.
And which parents get that choice? Do all parents get an equal
Sure.
choice?
Absolutely.
Is that how it is today? Is that how it is with charter?
It's not how it is today.
I'm just saying.
You look in Boston for charters. You have students who they go on waiting lists, and the parents go to the lotteries to get into a charter school, and they've even stopped going to the lotteries because they get disappointed that they don't get picked.
Listen, I think every public school needs to have the features and opportunities and performance that you're talking about charters being the panacea for. And I want to do a heavier lift. I want to do a heavier lift around public schools so that the teachers get the professional development they want and the remuneration they deserve, so that the students come out with strong technology skills, entrepreneurial instincts, communication skills that are necessary in today's job market and then the job market of the future. That stuff isn't being done, and it's not because of the teachers union. It's because what I'm talking about is intrinsically difficult. It is too challenging for No Child Left Behind, and as you said, some broken set of rules that go through Washington. I'm talking about an actual nuanced, multi-year, generational discussion about something that is challenging, but within our grasp, something that is important and takes 20 years to achieve.
My problem with that is that you have a situation where you've had several federal programs that have already, with the best of intentions, and I think we can both agree, the track record, putting the track record aside, they started with the best of intentions. Race to the top, No Child Left Behind. I don't think any legislator that was in Washington at the time that those bills were passed or those programs were passed sought out to make education worse or not improve education, right? So I want to challenge you on this, and we can move on to other subjects.
Things don't break because people have bad intentions.
But hang on a second.
Yeah.
We're talking about either increasing funding for a new federal bureaucracy or a different federal bureaucracy that the track record isn't good, where we're having more success when we see that local municipalities with greater control over the students.
So then why don't we sell all of our schools and privatize all the toll roads and leave education and housing to the private market, and everyone will be taken care of because the invisible hand will do it? No, by all means, we need government in order to look out for those who have been marginalized and left behind in every discussion. And when you point out that these programs haven't worked, can you just imagine where we would be if these programs hadn't been instantiated? It's not like they failed and we're doing worse than we were before. Well, they failed, and we're doing a little better. Now we need to do much better through not more bureaucracy, through more nuanced and motivated leadership. And frankly, we need better leadership.
More competent bureaucracy.
Well, certainly we need more competent leadership in politics, and I think that we are getting it year by year. People are plugging in, and experts, the wisdom of the crowd, which can't be beat, experts are getting in, going from high-paying technology and finance jobs into some of the bureaucracy, and doing so with altruism in their hearts. I think I see a time of unprecedented government success ahead of us if indeed we don't just sell away our greatest public assets.
I don't think you would argue. I think it's the level. I mean, decades ago, we as a country decided that public education was important. But it's the level of government to administer that public education.
Okay.
And we've seen, I would certainly much rather entrust my local state representative or my town council or city council or mayor or local school board, etc., who I'd see at the supermarket rather than somebody in D.C. because one, they're more responsive, two, they're more flexible, and three, I have more control. So
you and I are agreeing. You and I are agreeing on something.
I think because what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm hearing is you want to either expand, differentiate, or have a more powerful or more centralized form for education, which I think I would disagree with. I think the intentions of what you're listening to when you listen to the constituents of the 3rd District and those mothers are talking about the education that's going on, I think it's a better outcome for it to be for local decision making. Now, I mean, we can get,
Here's what I'm saying, though.
We can move on after this.
Well,
I'll give you the last word.
I hope we do. But I want to make the last word one about agreement. If you're saying that we need nuance, poise, responsiveness, accountability, and maybe even dollars at the local level, I agree with you. And if I'm saying that we need some kind of federal bureaucracy that talks about, yes, equity, but also outcomes, performance, and a future vision that's not 2 years but 20 years long, a vision that I don't think we have right now, by the way, then I hope you'll agree with me. But I'm also saying we need to synthesize those into a coherent discussion at all levels of government. And indeed, the local, the state, and the federal are completely siloed from one another. And on an issue like education, on an issue like equity, on an issue like job preparedness, where it is incredibly important that these three levels are in conference with one another, we may actually find a way to agree by sitting down at the table and doing that regionalism work and that ed reform work. But I don't see any reason why the objections you're bringing and the objections I'm bringing aren't important steering headlines for the whole conversation.
I'd say the major difference would be that the level of control and those dollars and coordination with the federal government involves a lot of strings attached, and it inhibits I think the goal of what you're talking about. But but your point is taken. I think you made your point clear. So we'll move on to something else.
Yeah, I don't want people to hear it's all about big government versus small government. The government has been spending a huge amount of money under this Republican control. It's not about the size of government, despite what I think a lot of Republicans would say. I think it's about ideology. And I think as long as we keep our public system intact and we are very critical and supportive of that system at the same time, I think we will achieve something incredible in the next generation. And I think if we don't, I think we're going to continue to be outpaced in a way that will be devastating to American families.
All right. I saw you're in favor of the $15 an hour federal minimum wage.
Yes, let us talk about it, you dirty conservative.
Yeah, why?
You know, for about 40 years, wages have been stagnant, especially at the entry level, but actually on into the middle class. Much of the middle class wages have been stagnant. And yet, the upper class has taken off, totally taken off in terms of receipts, in terms of income, but also in terms of wealth, the wealth you bank.
Sure.
What generates and stimulates dynamism in our economy is not when a wealthy foreign speculator buys up an apartment in Lowell and leaves it empty, or buys up one apartment in every city and leaves it empty. That's not what's driving our economy. What's driving our economy when someone who's working two jobs, 30% of minimum wage workers or something, 20-30% are parents. Maybe it's 23% or something. But those kids, those parents, those families, and any other minimum wage worker deserves the opportunity to rent housing and live somewhat near a job in Lowell or Lawrence or Dracut. Those families deserve to be able to go down to the mom and pop or down to any other place in town and spend some money on local goods. Those people deserve, frankly, to be able to invest in their future, whether it's housing or whether that's their retirement. And that is not happening right now. All of those things are things that bolster the economy significantly and immediately. When you take money from an employer and you put it in the pocket of that consumer, not only is that consumer supporting all the local businesses, including the one that they're hired by, but that local consumer is doing so with an economic multiplier, an economic impact that is greater than a wealthy person with the same money.
Okay. You've used some phraseology that I'm going to call you out on, but I'm not picking on it.
Okay.
You said put more money in the pockets of those people. So a couple questions.
Hardworking people deserve a basic wage, a living wage.
Right, a $15 living wage.
$30,000 a year, right?
That's what it adds up to for full-time work. So where does that money come from?
What do you mean, where does it come from?
Where does it come from? You mandate that you increase the
I'm a
wage.
business owner.
Sure.
When I started promoting $15 minimum wage, I wanted to make sure everyone I hired was making $15. It was tough on the business for about one split second. Okay. And then you find out that you have better retention. I sat down with another local business owner. We had the argument. He made the choice, and he said, I'm going to show you how difficult it is on me. Better retention, better workplace performance, right? More upward mobility, people invested in their job role, better work product, better revenue.
So you made a choice.
I made a choice. That other business owner made a choice. Business owners all over the country are making a choice, and it's benefiting them. And now, their employees.
Why mandate it through force of law if
because
the choice
now
works? And
their
now
employees are able to survive. And before they were living in debt, a debt crisis that is crippling our economy.
Okay, so that money has to come from somewhere for Well, for any type of thing. First of all, federal minimum wage is across the entire country if you're going to mandate that for $15 an hour.
That's
and
right.
certainly we have a higher cost of living here on the East Coast.
Sure.
Especially right outside of Boston.
That's right. Our state minimum wage should be
yeah.
higher than $15. That's correct. But the federal minimum wage should be 15.
Then I'll sidetrack and go back to why not 20?
Well, I mean, I think the living wage.
And I say that it's a cliched, retort.
No, it's a great retort.
But tell me why not 20? Why
the
not
living
25?
wage is different in every city, and I think the living wage is calculated in a city like Boston is now up to 17 or 18, and the living wage in a city like Lowell or Lawrence may be closer to 14 or 16. Right, but we're trying to set a federal floor. Did you know that a minimum wage worker can't afford to rent a 2-bedroom apartment in any of the 50 states?
I know that. I did actually know that, and I know that also most minimum wage work is designed as a stepping stone to the workforce.
Is that still true?
Yes.
Do you know if that claim is still true? Because I have a strong feeling, in fact, I think the data would show that it's not a stepping stone for a lot of workers.
Well, if they're working multiple jobs at minimum wage, but if we want to go back to the history of the minimum wage, we can take a tangent and do
Sure.
that, but I think the fact that workers making the minimum wage right now all across the country, they're probably working several different jobs. They probably can't get full-time work because of various other laws that have been in place over the past few years. But they don't want to stay necessarily in that minimum wage job. They are earning money at the minimum wage to gain skills, to move on from that. I mean, the minimum wage, I don't think, was ever designed to be a permanent salary.
I love the idea
for individuals
of a stepping stone. I love your idea.
Well,
but that's not how it plays out.
Well, but it is, because what actually happens is when you make the cost of labor too high artificially, because this is an artificial a step you're taking by raising the minimum wage to $15 instead of choosing to, like you did with your organization.
Right.
Because if you realize retention is important and you want to keep those good employees, you pay them more. I mean, that's the market. So what you're describing is actually the free market and what you did in that case. However, though, if somebody's labor out in Nebraska or Texas or Ohio is only worth far less than $15, say $10.50, that cost has to come from somewhere. So, for instance,
but that's not quite how the economy works, is it?
No, it actually is.
Let's debate about it.
Sure,
I disagree with you.
Oh, okay, sure. For instance, if
I agree with you, it has to come from somewhere, but I also agree the benefits are immediate and reflexive.
So if an employer has a certain level of income coming through the door,
right,
and they have an expense, their employees are part of their expenses and their payroll,
right.
They either have to charge more, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So their customers more, and there will be market effects after that. There's less people coming through the door of their business, or they have to cut back on the hours for other people, or maybe not hire new people and put in automation in place. I mean, that's what actually happens.
There's an important concept here. Go ahead.
One more point. When you have something like the minimum wage and it causes price increases, maybe they're minimal and you don't notice it. But over time, prices will go up for the everyday goods that those businesses supply, and therefore it's somewhat of a wash.
It's not a wash. Can I describe how this works from the perspective of economists?
Sure. Well, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, we got to talk about automation for a quick second, because you said if you increase wages too high, those jobs will get automated. But it turns out
I said artificially.
Well, fine. So so we heard leaders basically say, if you do this $15 minimum wage in Massachusetts, we're going to have to automate. And then no $15 minimum wage has happened. They automated anyway. They didn't automate.
Because it's coming. It's been graduated over the past few years.
Yes. Well, no, that's not what I'm talking about or what they're talking about. The automation is coming whether or not the wages increase, first of all. It's happening. When McDonald's can save money, they're not thinking like, is this the right thing to do? Should we replace the worker with the kiosk? They're just thinking, can we save $4 an hour?
But the government's escalate, or I said sped it up.
I don't think anything has been exacerbated. The technology, I worked on some of the first touch kiosks 6 years ago in my consulting, and someone said, hey, we're not going to tell you what it's for, but can you make this a robust touch kiosk, right? And you see the inception of that, you see it roll out, and you see its deployment in industry, and you know that it's been coming inexorably for 6 years, for 10 years.
Of course.
Right? Okay. And that's has nothing to do with the wage discussion. Now you go...
Well, it has a lot to do with the wage discussion. If a business owner has to choose between an employee that's lower cost than it would be for maintenance and installation of automation, it depends on what their business is. But they may go for the employer, they may go for the automation.
I'm just saying,
the government forces that.
I'm not necessarily disagreeing that when people are pushed, they find innovative solutions. What I'm disagreeing with is I'm saying automation is already here, and the wage discussion has not yet fully arrived. Automation is replacing jobs, whether or not we have a wage discussion.
Well, but I'd agree with you in that statement. Mm-hmm. But the problem I think we have is what's the meat of that wage discussion? Do you know what I mean?
So let's get back to that and talk about the economy.
Sure.
There's something called demand inelasticity. When this is the argument I have with my friend who runs now a very successful chain of fast food joints. And his claim was, listen, if I just start everyone off at 15 or even near 15, it's going to cost us more, and we're going to have to charge, when you look at the volume he does, he said we're going to have to charge 30 cents, 50 cents, maybe even $1 extra per sandwich.
Okay.
And I said, why don't you do that and see what happens? I want to see if your volume goes down at all. Price went up, the wages went up, the volume didn't go down. Why? Because it's Cambridge? Is it because it's Cambridge? Would that happen in Kansas City?
Maybe.
No, well, I think it would happen in Kansas City. It happens because when prices go up on certain goods, the demand doesn't necessarily change. The person came there for that good. It's still within an acceptable margin.
Okay.
Demand and elasticity means you have a little bit of wiggle room in your prices. And because many of these businesses, your dry cleaner, your sandwich shop, your downtown businesses are volume businesses, the cost per sale doesn't even go up that much.
Okay, so I mean, you're kind of proving my point in a end round way. So but the point being is, so that 30-cent increment that person has to cost for that sandwich.
Right.
If you mandate that across the board nationwide, and basically artificial inflation across the board, so people will have to do what your friend did.
Great.
Here's the problem.
And you're saying all the sandwiches go up in cost. Now the person making 15 doesn't even have the benefit of that 15.
Yes.
It turns out the way it shakes out is now I'm paying 30 cents extra for a sandwich. Now I'm paying 20 cents extra for my dry cleaning, a volume business. I may even be paying $100 extra for my used car. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that worker earns a huge amount more from this adjustment than if that had not been undertaken. That's a fact.
Feel free to send me the data. I'll post it in the show notes on that.
Sure.
It's about trade-offs. It's
not a wash, by the way. No, what you're doing is you're making everything that the worker buys
more expensive.
5% more expensive.
Yes.
And you're giving them how much more buying power? You're giving them 30% more buying power.
But think about this for a second. What you're arguing for is trying to thread the needle through federal legislation when you're saying that the benefits. So, but here's the thing: when you artificially raise the prices of labor, and everybody's moved up to that now new equilibrium. Do you think that increases the retention, or does it now then have to go to $17 or $18? So
it's a good question.
So the benefits.
Ideally, it's a pipeline, right?
See, the benefits.
It's a tiered structure.
The benefits of I'm saying of leaving it up to the market.
Yeah.
Of giving your employees good benefits and a good wage.
Yeah.
On their own, because you think you want to keep them, and you think you can grow the business or sustain the business in that way. The worst people in the world are the bureaucrats in D.C. to artificially make that decision, because we don't actually know if they can thread that needle. Okay, in terms of, you're talking about
this small government argument is so silly. Are you arguing that there should? Are you arguing
it's the foundation of the country?
Republicans aren't small government. Do you think Trump right now is small government?
No. Believe me, you're right.
Okay.
On this. I won't even disagree with you. I'm fully upset with the hypocrisy of the Republican-held House right now in terms of we have now passed $20 trillion in debt.
So we agree with each other. I just don't want to lose the thread of the minimum wage for a second.
No, well, I mean, we can go back to that, but but as an aside,
but you agree.
As an aside, we have to balance the budget. I don't think that's even a question. I'm completely
Remember
pissed.
when Clinton balanced the budget? Remember that?
I remember when Newt did it with him. Absolutely.
Okay.
So we'll wrap up on the minimum wage.
Minimum wage.
I think I've said,
But are you arguing that there should be no minimum wage? Are you saying that the market's going to do a good job regulating this?
Well, how much of an inhibitor it is to new labor for kids in high school working? I mean, this is the thing. If a small business, if you make it too expensive for them to hire that summer worker, they're not going to hire that summer worker. In between years of high school. So
here's what I believe that various studies, and there are countries with a high minimum wage, but entire countries similar to ours in many ways. Australia, for example. When you put more dollars in the pocket of your employee, you may stretch for a second, but all of a sudden, the other employees of other businesses with more dollars in their pocket are trafficking into your business, and they're buying cars at the used car dealership because they have a couple extra dollars per hour of pay. They're coming into the dry cleaners. They're coming into the sandwich shop. And frankly, they're coming into a whole lot of other services that they need to succeed and can't afford right now, or go into debt to afford, which isn't good for anyone.
I just say, well, we can move on from this, but they're not real dollars. If it's artificially,
you're still on the it's a wash thing. Trust me, it's not. Well, how many sandwiches do you have to buy per day?
With all due respect, I don't trust you on it. Okay. But I think it, and I'm not saying that as a personal judgment.
No, I understand.
But I think your logic is a bit circumspect.
We will forward you the studies, and in fact, there's a study.
By the way, if you want to forward me anything, I will include
and the
them in
Dubé report, by the way, which talks about the effect of minimum wage on employment, whether you can go too high and it can end up doing you wrong with companies not being able to afford the labor. There is a real threshold. There is a real level at which it becomes difficult. For some communities, 15, we're just coming up upon 15 being the right amount now, and it wasn't true 2 years ago. But for most communities in America, you got to be able to afford housing, and the 15 actually is the right number, and we're speeding past it pretty quickly.
Well, I'd say that the 15 is the right number for now if you get it. And then it'll soon be 20 and 25, and you'll be caught in the
number
vicious
can be
cycle.
Calculated mathematically. We'll figure out what it is.
This is central planning of the economy for wage labor prices is.
I agree with you that capitalism requires wage flexibility. I'm just saying that traditionally the minimum wage protects us, but because when a firm benefits from an up economy, they don't just volunteer to increase everyone's wages and then say, and the down economy will adjust. They take the profits and send them to investors, and for that reason.
And what do those investors do with that money?
Largely, I mean, they're spending it in ways that don't bolster the economy as fast, the quote-unquote velocity of money, as when you put it in the people who have a more dire need for local goods.
No, well, I mean, what those investors do is they invest their money.
They invest their money in ways that don't come back to the rest of the economy with as much dependability and consistency as when you put the money in the working class and middle class. That's a basic economic precept. No. When you put your money in military, it's different than when you put your money in roads and infrastructure.
Putting your money, I mean, you're using the phrase putting their money, but this is the idea of what the government does with the money versus what the private sector does.
What I'm saying is when our economy has an emphasis on certain sectors of the economy, we do better. And when we have emphasis on other sectors, we don't do as well. There's an economic multiplier.
Emphasis by what? By whom?
For example, if the federal government mandates a minimum wage, you are, by mandate, increasing the amount of our overall economy that is accrued to working class workers. That is a choice that has an impact on our economic growth. When you cut taxes for the richest 1%, that also has an impact. It's a negative impact, and Governor Brown back in Kansas has seen how you have to run away from that instinct, right? Republicans are reeling from trickle-down economics in Kansas because all of the tax cuts did exactly what I said. Instead of investing in the people who bolster your economy, they invested in the people who have a slower
What
effect on the
Governor
economy.
Brownback did in Kansas was not cut government spending enough to the rate of which of which he cut taxes.
Are you still on it? No, I think that
I'm still on what?
I think we're pretty clear that what happened there is that tax cuts weren't the right solution for that economy. And there are times
not
when
if you don't cut spending. I'll agree with you there. I mean, look.
I'm saying that he could have bolstered the economy from the bottom up.
Here's the thing. I'll follow your logical thread, and we can go through that if you want. No, but you said if you want to put dollars in the hands of the working class folks, your solution is through the minimum wage.
That's one of many solutions, by the way.
Sure. Okay,
and also give entrepreneurs a break and small business owners a break.
It's the premier one. But yes, a break from what? So
a break from outrageous taxes on payroll, for example, as you're just starting out your business.
A good example. So right. So that's a fundamental precept of what Republicans should be talking about when we discuss these issues, which is that you want to put more money in the pockets of the consumer. You do that by removing it from the federal government or state government, what have you.
Right.
What happened in Kansas, like I said, they didn't cut spending. They have their own problems, but the logic there lies. A solution for you, from your perspective, is increase to $15 the minimum wage. However, if you remove the tax burden on those paying it for payroll taxes or income taxes or whatever the case may be, you're automatically doing it. And that income then does have upward pressure on the economy.
So let's agree. Let's do a couple things in a package. Let's increase. So
let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to? I mean, this is and all right. This is a wide open seat. I don't think there's any front runner for this nomination. I'll put this out there for anybody. I'll have any of your primary opponents on the podcast. Happy to do it. Are you willing to make deals? Are you willing to make trade-offs for that? I mean, for instance,
not only am I willing to make trade-offs, but I bet you that there's areas of consensus that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are ready for. Can we reduce? Would you vote? I mean,
hypothetical, but a realistic hypothetical. Would you, if you got your minimum wage increase, would you vote for a tax cut?
For whom?
Across the board.
No. Why? Why would you give a tax cut across the board to people with unprecedented wealth? They're benefiting greatly from the economy, and they can afford the greater proportion of tax. Why would you even do that?
So you believe in heavy progressive taxation?
Yes.
All right.
And in fact, we have as Americans since time immemorial.
No, since 1913.
You think there's not a history of progressive taxation and progressive taxation dialogue at the inception of this nation?
There's a conversation, but it wasn't done until, what was the amendment? The 13th. I don't know the amendment off the top of my head that did that legalized income tax, but income tax, was originally a low tax thing, and it very shortly, in quick order, shot up to
instead of talking about the historical perspective.
That's boring. But would you be willing? Why wouldn't you, across the board tax cut for everybody?
So here's where we'll probably agree more. I think we'll agree on cutting pork. Cutting spending that is not judicious, that's not in the interest of a district or of the nation, but it's just happening for exposure, happening for compromise. There's a lot of ways in which we can cut spending. There's a lot of ways in which we can hold accountable government run amok.
What would you cut specifically?
Well, I said the thing that I think is the most consequential waste, which is the obvious pork. There was
such as what?
Well, there was a cute story on Candidate Confessional. I forget who was tackling it, but there was this Republican fallen from grace who thought it would be so easy to hit 3 million or more appropriation for sheep shearing. We're going to support sheep shearing. And he said, well, I thought it would be so easy to cut through my own party doing this stuff because that industry is doing fine, and who needs big government coming in and saying we've got to support that anyway? Isn't that a local or a state initiative? And it turns out his own Republican allies threw him under the bus, and it was a bipartisan effort to throw him under the bus. And, pork spending is only, $6 billion or whatever it is.
Nothing.
But that's billion with a B, and I'd like to tackle basic stuff like that. I bet you there's spending like that in every department. There's spending like that certainly in the military-industrial complex.
So you cut the military?
I'm not saying cut the military. I'm saying I've seen the inside of the contracting process. I've done trainings for increasing veteran-owned businesses and increasing contracting between the government and veteran-owned businesses through the Pentagon and through Small Business Association. I have been in there promoting that process as a contractor myself. I can tell you there is waste in the military.
Of course there's waste in the military.
And I sat in a class of commanders in graduate school. It was all commanders and me and one other MIT student, and we heard in that class how the commanders themselves see the waste, know the waste, and don't see a political avenue to eliminate the waste.
But that waste, I mean, that's
waste in the billions and billions and billions of dollars.
That's something that I think Republicans get nailed for when they talk about cutting waste as a way to save money.
Okay.
I mean, the real heavy hitters, when we get down to it, are Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security.
So you're saying people shouldn't have health care?
Yeah, that's exactly what I said, Nadeem. Come on, stop it. Don't do that. I mean, let's talk for real.
No, let's talk for real. I think those are good programs. I think we can eliminate waste, but it takes 10 or 20 years. I don't think we can do this stuff overnight. I think we need a generational movement to root out, identify, make transparent, and then eliminate waste. You can do that with open data. You can do that with public scrutiny.
I think that's a little bit pie in the sky. In the terms of...
Pie in the sky to start a 20-year movement not to waste billions of dollars? Totally waste. Crony capitalism. Give them away to a friend. Give a contract away to a friend.
If you're talking,
why do that
in Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid, or are you talking
across the entire government, where every department has a section where people today, right now as we speak, are giving contracts to their friends in a legal way that should not be legal, in a way that wastes those benefits, in a way that is paid out year after year, even long after those line items have outlived their usefulness? Why are we allowing that in a bipartisan way?
Well, I mean...
and why are we talking about Social Security and Medicare that folks who are aging...
Because they're going bankrupt, that's why.
Yes, it's a difficult and challenging thing to promote, but no American has ever challenged the validity of a retiree surviving.
Surviving on what? Well, there won't be any money for them to survive on. We have $20 trillion in debt, and all of these programs, the unfunded liabilities of them go into the tens of trillions of dollars. So there needs to be reform that takes place so the programs are sustainable.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying we have lower hanging fruit right now that I'm talking about over here, and you want to talk about something that people depend on. I'm saying fix the thing that people depend on and eliminate the waste.
Because in a federal budget that of federal spending annually that's in the trillions of dollars, when you're attacking waste that's in the millions and maybe creeps up to the low billions.
I'm talking about the low billions?
Tell me how much waste takes place in the major entitlement programs that you can cut, and what is it then?
Yeah, but I wanted to talk about the waste that's easier to cut. I'm talking about the waste that's due to actually giving away a contract to a buddy in a sole source scenario that's happening all over government that adds up to huge numbers of billions.
You know what? I wouldn't even disagree with you, but it's not huge numbers of billions.
I don't think that's under dispute.
It's not a major. I mean, our annual deficit is $500 billion. So, or there and about, and it's about to go up. And I'll openly criticize the Republicans in Congress for that utter irresponsibility.
We can agree. Utterly irresponsible.
Utter irresponsibility.
Okay.
But
high five, team.
But we'll see. But my point being, for the major drivers of the debt, for the major drivers of the expenses that our federal government entails, it's Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid. Without putting aside the validity and the value of those programs for a moment, would you not agree that reform needs to take place within those programs so that they are more sustainable?
I think when folks like you talk about reform, folks like me read it as eliminate. And if you mean to reform something in order to fund it, in order to plan it, in order to debate it, by all means, we need more debate. We need more math. We need more research. We need more CBO scores. And I think we need more criticism on both sides of the aisle about whether this project is really going to work. And that doesn't lead us to eliminate it. Ideally, it allows us to reform it in a way that is bipartisan, in a way that's going to actually support the next generation of retirees. But if you want to preempt the discussion and say, hey, this thing is a crazy system that could never possibly work out, and it's wrong on the face of it, to take care of people as they enter this phase of life, or folks who fall on hard times and suffer an accident, I would disagree with that type of reform.
Well, I think that's those are the most extreme examples of what we're talking about here.
Okay.
But so, for instance, I mean, I think an area of agreement is there's about $150 billion of abuse in the Medicaid program, Medicare program right now. I mean, just not when I say abuse, I mean fraud.
Yeah.
I mean, flat out tax. So
Yeah.
Those are the parts where
We can agree there's fraud.
We can agree on that. But the Social Security retirement age. So, for instance, there, it hasn't changed in decades.
You're saying people should work till
was-
70? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying.
A lot of people still don't live till 70.
That's correct, but
Okay.
but I know what you're trying to do there, and you know, if you want to go there, that's fine. But
No, I'm not trying to gotcha you. I'm just
no.
really curious.
No, I think as we live longer, and we certainly live longer, it was meant as a program for the very aged. At the time, you know, it was put in place. Okay, so you have a retirement age of 66. You have senior citizens, if you want to call them that, after the age of 65. That right now. You know, I think in the past few years, Social Security was paying out more than it was taking in. I think it might have happened in 2012. I'll double check on that.
The boomers, man, the boomers are getting us.
Yeah. Oh, and they don't want it, and they're not willing to cut their benefits
Good.
at all. So
Good.
But, well, no, there's not enough workers to support them. That's a problem. So, I mean, we're just putting it on the credit card for our kids. And and right now,
and you know, I agree with you that we should balance the budget, and that we should talk about how we're going to get there through a progressive tax, by the way. So we've talked about the issues that can bolster flagging programs. But I don't think that my 72-year-old father, who's working, by the way, should be the gold standard for everyone. Things happen to you at this age, things happen to you at this time, where it's not the easiest to keep working those 40-hour weeks just to keep the
of course not.
the standard of living up. And I think that people want to, frankly, and deserve to rely on a retirement in this country, the richest country in the history of the world, that is not pushing them into complete and abject frailty at retirement age.
But the problem you have, though, is the way that it's structured and the way it was initially designed. It was a pension program, a defined benefit program, and more workers that paid into it are withdrawing much more than they did. So I think the ratio is about for every dollar they put in, they take 2 or 3 out. Just by the length of time that they live until they pass away.
If you're saying we shouldn't be running a pyramid scheme, I completely agree with you.
Well, you use the word pyramid scheme.
Well, you're describing like yes. It's a pyramid scheme, and I'm saying if you're talking about reforming our financial outlook by doing more math and understanding how we need to tax large corporations or the 1%, I'm right there with you.
I'm not talking about that.
Okay.
Because I don't believe I think that there needs to be a significant transition away from a defined benefit plan mandated by the government.
What would that look like?
Well, I think it could take its form in varying ways. I mean, when I ran for Congress, I had a plan that people who with 401ks or retirement plans already could opt out of receiving the benefit for taking their retirement money tax-free. Something like that. If they say, I'm not going to take it for this year.
What happens when a 2008 happens and it turns out massive fraud can wipe out entire retirements totally outside your control?
Yeah. I understand that might be what you're saying, but that's not what happened. In 2008, if you want to take the tangent, the 2008...
You're saying people didn't lose their entire retirement in some cases?
No, what I'm saying, what caused it. I mean, you're saying massive fraud caused it. What caused it is actual a government mandate that said we had to provide that banks had to provide loans for individuals with subprime mortgages.
I think
and that inflated the cost.
I think the consensus about why this was caused is shifting, but it's not shifting in that direction.
No, I'd have to. An honest disagreement, we'll call it that. I mean, and we've done actually episodes on that specific issue. I'll tag it in the show notes for those. But the government mandates to loan to people who were not always able to pay them back. Drove up the price of real estate and caused the bubble that crashed.
I understand that has been a conservative talking point, but from my opinion, what caused the crash is that there were folks on the ground level issuing loans that they knew were no good. There were ratings agencies looking at no good loans and saying, we don't even know what's in here, but we assume it's fine. Some of it we know isn't fine, and we're going to ignore it. And there were people in between those two poles who were actually betting against the housing market because they knew how fraudulent their instruments were, and many of them have been fined in extreme ways due to their fraud.
And what do you think was the impetus?
You think the government was the impetus of fraud? It was dollars. It was income. They were making money on this process.
It was a twofold impact. The Community Reinvestment Act, which drew red lines around communities, and then banks were then mandated to give loans.
These banks were excited to give loans. These banks were excited to give these loans.
No, they were required to
You
give
think
loans.
that they weren't chasing these loans to make more money, bundle them into CDOs, and then pass them off in a market as an instrument that's more exotic with more profit for more things we've never sold before?
The only probable piece of agreement that we'd have on this is that they shouldn't have gotten bailed out, even though the government mandated them to do that.
Well, we can agree on something.
We can agree on that, but
and by the way, the next time a bailout...
But also the flip side of that coin is that the Federal Reserve was constantly artificially keeping those interest rates low over the long term since Alan Greenspan in the Clinton administration to prop up a new bubble. So
we can agree that low interest rates haven't always been judicious.
Well, no, but those are the drivers of it, and you have too much cheap money out of there. Aside from that, we took a little left turn there. We'll try to get back on track. But I don't even know what the track was now. What were we talking about prior to that? But
I think we were talking about minimum wage at some point.
Okay.
I'm enjoying the number of popular Republican Democrat tropes that we have dived into,
let me tell you something. What I'm hopeful for this conversation and for any future conversation is that people won't hear this type of conversation. I can't. Anywhere else. You're not going to hear this on CNN or MSNBC or Fox News. We're trying to dive deep and go back and forth and treat each other in a respectful manner, and do so in an intelligent way and a civil way. So far, we're succeeding in that.
Psyched about it.
Yeah. So, but I think where it diverted was we were talking about. I mentioned the entitlement programs in terms of the driver of our debt and our federal spending. Why don't we somewhat shift topics on that? Because you've advocated for, or on your website, you're in favor of Medicare for all.
Yes.
So
healthcare is a human right.
Single pay. Well, no, it's not. It's a human need. It's a human need, and there's a distinction.
How do you figure out who deserves that? Is it just whoever has the money for that?
Deserves it? You use this word deserve. What makes one deserving of a good or service that must be provided to them? I mean, I
would say in the modern conception of the American dream, I would say that Republicans and Democrats agree that every child and every family deserves an equal shot at economic potential, economic future, and economic mobility.
I would agree with you. Equality of opportunity is, I think, a consensus that we should, as all Americans, agree with.
When Jane or Felipe or whoever has a parent who's been injured on the job, and I want to tell you a great story about my employer. When I was a varsity squash coach at MIT, my predecessor had a very serious injury, and we'll talk about that in a second. When they have an injury on the job and they haven't been covered by health care for whatever reason, the employer says, well, not my business. I paid you enough for health care. And the employee says, I wish you knew about my business. At no point did you pay me enough for health care. And now the person goes home, they're out of work, they're earning their workers' comp, it's costing the system more money, right? But they're not earning enough to take care of their health care needs, and this is health care needs that might plague them for the rest of their life. And now Jane, at home, 6 years old, is going to have a different economic outlook because that parent isn't working for a whole lot of reasons. Educational outlook, economic outlook, not to mention the fact that the parents themselves are going to suffer some consequences from going into debt, sometimes crippling debt, sometimes permanent debt, just for having an accident at work that could happen to you or me or someone else. And who's to say now that because I have great health care that I deserve that health care more than that parent?
Well, healthcare, despite it being claimed as a right by progressives like yourself, is still a good or service that must be provided for.
Why?
So because it is.
Why is it a good or service?
I see your friend. We've got time, but I want to stay on this for a few more minutes.
Okay.
And we'll wrap up on this topic because I think it's important.
Okay.
So as a right, which means so my wife's in healthcare.
Okay.
Which means so as a right, that means the government must compel her to work for whomever, no matter what. I mean, so you have to demand.
Could you say that again? Your wife is a medical service provider.
Correct.
Okay.
So but regardless of her or anybody else,
right?
When you claim it as a right, it means the government must take from me to pay for you, for everybody else's.
That's right, like roads, for example.
No, it's actually different than roads.
How so?
Well, there's a couple things. I mean, you can look at it. It's I guess the term. Let me think about it for a second. Did I write it down? Oh, no, I did not. But so roads are non-exclusive and non-rivalrous into terms, and it's like fire department, for instance. Okay, so it doesn't cost you or I any more incrementally to provide for the road or to provide for the fire department, because
that amount is a smaller part of the cost.
We sort of share it. We've agreed that that's an expense that we all can, the government will take from us.
Schools, then. Let's use schools instead.
Sure. Well,
schools have incremental costs. You have 500 more students. You need another school. $300 million. Costs everyone more money. Why does everyone get to go to school? I don't get that.
Fair enough. Well, everyone gets to go because we've decided that education is a premium that we're willing to pay for.
And we're not willing to pay for health care?
Here's the distinction.
It has huge costs on the back end if we don't pay for it up front?
Let me finish. Let's try to go back and forth instead of talk over each other.
All right.
No, in terms of every person has a right to access that education. The government can't prevent them from receiving that education, just like the government can't prevent them from receiving that health care. The problem is when you have a product or a service like healthcare, and no matter which way you cut it, it is, you have a demand on the system that is that you'll automatically create more demand if everybody has the same. I guess what the word is, the same. They won't use that road anymore, but they will use the healthcare in it, where it does become more elastic. But you're putting more people into the same bucket of goods and increasing or decreasing the supply or increasing the price. So when I say things like decreasing the supply, so for instance, you'd have to do rationing, because you'd be allowing.
It's a 20-year program. We invest more in educating more doctors.
Look, I mean, nurses. I'm sure
we're already in short supply of nurses. Yeah. We have some investments to do to accommodate everyone.
But those nurses would be probably in shorter supply, and you'd experience shortages if the market factors are removed from that. I mean, see, what makes America unique in the terms of the healthcare discussion is that we sort of, in a back-end way, subsidize all the other countries with our innovative technology, with our ability to basically adhere to the market demand. So, for instance, Canadians and people from the UK, people from Western Europe, when they can't get the services they need there because of rationing, they come here and they have to raise the money or have the money, and they come here to fulfill those needs. Now, I mean, I'll let you go in a second, but the point being is, to say you have a right to somebody else's labor, well, then there's going to be consequences for that. Now, you can
the
claim
consequences.
it.
I'm saying, sorry, go ahead.
No, you can claim that as something that would be beneficial to the person, but in the long run, in the 20-year plan you're talking about, it would actually be worse. Because what happens is innovation goes down, and look, folks like Robert Reich have gone on record on saying this. Innovation goes down, supply dries up, and you have a situation where the overall healthcare outcome for the people that you mentioned, the anecdotal cases, goes down, and you don't even have a two-tiered system. You have a no-tiered system where everybody.
I understand the picture you're painting.
Okay.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, I disagree with you.
Yeah.
I believe the cost increase, the squeeze on resources that you're talking about, is already here, and it's here for a different reason than you might surmise. People are already getting health care. When we have an opioid epidemic outside this building, and someone gets picked up and delivered to the hospital, and then to psychiatric services, and then to an incomplete pipeline of care, We're all paying for that right now.
Correct.
When someone goes to the emergency room because they have a glass splinter in their finger and it's not coming out, do you have one?
No, I'm pointing at the microphone so you can tilt it to your mouth. So, yeah.
Okay. That is all money that's coming out of our economy right now. And I think the proponents of a Medicare for all system are saying, listen, you're going to pay for it sooner or later. Might as well pay for it in a way where the government is negotiating better prices and where we're getting a bipartisan drug price transparency, something Republicans and Democrats already want today. We push something like that through so that, by the way, on the way through the scarcity discussion, you're not paying $37 for an aspirin when you show up at the hospital, and your aunt, who is benefiting from some scarce resources, isn't paying twice the price that my aunt is at the same hospital for the same service.
So a few months ago, maybe a year ago, I had John Gruber on the podcast, okay, one of the authors of Obamacare, the ACA. In that discussion, we went over a whole host of things, and I think he and I agreed was that there should be greater transparency on pricing for things like that.
Okay.
I think the problem, though, is right now the Medicare for all. For instance, I mean, you should know what the reimbursement rate for Medicare is.
Go on.
For Congress. Okay. Well, it's about 60 cents on the dollar. Meaning, your example that you already given, people who aren't on Medicare are subsidizing above and beyond their tax dollars the medical expenses of Medicare. So if a service costs $1, the provider only gets 60 cents on that dollar, or whatever the metric is more recently.
And by the way, the reimbursement rate discussion is totally messed up, and none of the prices, the 60% you brought up, none of them are real. None of this is real. Because none of the costs are real. None of the reimbursement numbers are real.
But that's a problem with Medicare.
Okay.
But that's a problem with
Medicare. That's the problem with our whole healthcare system.
Because it hides a lot of things. If you're
you think Medicare is hiding the cost of things? Our whole healthcare system, and largely the insurers and the middlemen and the middlewomen are hiding the prices of things.
You don't worry about it.
Yeah, you got to do it. You got to keep them gender neutral.
You
got to keep them gender neutral.
Of course.
Congress people.
Yeah. But to back up on that, Medicare is actually, I'd say, more of a cause against Trump.
I disagree with you.
You don't think it hides transparency? I
think that when you have an insurer who gets to pay half as another insurer at the same hospital, when you have an uninsured paying double the insurer who's already getting screwed in the same setting that we just described for the two competing insurers, you have a messed up system. And that system is messed up for insurers, it's messed up for the uninsured, and it's messed up for Medicare, which is a payer to those service providers. You think the problem isn't the service providers? The insurers, rather?
My problem is that you want to heave this messed up system onto everybody that in the country. So I mean, you're saying it's a broken bureaucracy.
But you're saying that Medicare is breaking the system, and I'm saying that the marketplace is a little messed up. And if we just look into it together for 5 seconds, maybe your friends and my friends won't get screwed when they're providing medical care.
The problem is advocating for Medicare for all or single payer system where all that bureaucracy that you're talking about is removed, and now you replace it with a government bureaucracy, will lead in the long term to lower healthcare outcomes, but worse healthcare outcomes.
See, we disagree on the capacity of government to negotiate good deals. I've seen government negotiate a good deal over here at the Volpe Project, and they got a good deal. I didn't agree with why they went through with the deal, but they got a good price for assets that were on an open market.
Okay, so a lot of this is some wishful thinking, because previously in the podcast you mentioned all the bad deals that currently take place in
education,
can't get rid of.
And in pork,
we can't get rid of. So if I'm going to say, all right, maybe if you wave your magic wand, if you get to the United States Congress and you snap your fingers, and make it so that none of this waste takes place, all of this pork is gone. Good for you.
Okay.
Good for you. But
where's the but? Tell me what's your point.
But it's probably not going to happen. And what we have is I won't say ineffective system, but a grossly inefficient system. Currently,
it is not
with
challenging,
Medicare, and it's also an extremely expensive system.
It is not challenging.
How much?
You remove some conflicts of interest. You limit the amount that elected officials in retirement and staffers in retirement can lobby. You put some basic transparency in. You put some public scrutiny of public deals in. And I guarantee you that with some basic precepts, one that Democrats agree on, ones that Republicans agree on, with some basic good government, you come in and you're going to tell me that the government is going to negotiate a bad deal for the consumers such that the healthcare market's going to blow up? No. On the contrary, we're getting screwed right now. We're getting screwed right now, and the government is going to save us money.
What I'm saying, Nadeem, is if the government is the only one negotiating the deal, they are so powerful that it will inherently be a bad deal.
I think you've oversimplified the complexity of this market. And by the way, there can still be private players, even in a Medicare for All system, for those who want a different tier of coverage. And by the way, that stuff like that exists all over the world. I'm not the one to prescribe.
It mostly exists in France.
I'm not. France and South America, it exists all over the world. All over the world, there's different tiers of coverage. I'm saying that everyone deserves a basic tier of coverage, or else we're all going to pay for it later. In fact, we're paying for it now.
We are paying because it's expensive, because it's good.
I'm saying we're paying to cover people in a way that is not giving them comprehensive or preventative care.
But trading one bureaucracy that we have right now for another one that's as inflexible as the federal government. And by the way, we haven't even gotten to the cost of it. I mean, it's going to cost a lot. Are you willing to prepare when you get up on that a debate stage for the primary candidates for the 3rd district? How much are you willing to raise people's taxes? And you got to raise everybody's taxes a lot. Because
analysts are showing the middle class saves money in a Medicare for All system.
Okay,
saves money. Pay more here, pay less here, you save money.
Right. But if you're doing that, if you're going to increase, so for every dollar worth of taxation that happens, and you get maybe 70 cents worth of services, that's not a savings of money. And price controls for what the government would mandate and a lot.
Can you say that again? I didn't follow that last part.
All right. So for instance, in countries that have more of a socialized medicine setup, they get about, good ones, they get about a 70% return on their money.
Okay.
Meaning, whatever dollar they spend or whatever dollar is taken from them in taxes, the inefficiency of the bureaucracy comes back at about 70%.
Right. Solar panels are 20% and governments are 70% at their best. Right? Okay, everything has inefficiency.
Sure.
Okay. And you're saying
everything does have inefficiency.
Okay.
You're right. But the government is more inefficient.
Maybe depending on what sector you're talking about.
Back to my original question, because I want to kind of get this home, and we'll wrap this up. I was getting the high sign from your team, and I'll respect that.
Thank you.
How much are you willing to raise taxes to implement a Medicare for All system?
To the extent I understand the financial projections now, any increase in taxes turns into an immediate savings in medical costs that are currently due to the consumer, and so it pays for itself for the middle class. That's all I need to know.
So taxes pay for themselves. That's all you need to know. So
all I need to know is that the middle class worker is not going to be paying more if we insure everyone. Great.
So and you don't care about what that cost is or the outcome of it, or
no? I'm saying that there's a cost savings and there's better service and there's better benefits, and it's done in a way that is humane, because we all deserve coverage. We all deserve an equal shot.
Okay, so just so the audience knows, I think the last projection was about 32 trillion over 10 years. About $3 trillion, almost doubling our national current expenditure. They tried this in Vermont. They did the math. It would double the budget. Now, not double the healthcare budget. It would double the actual budget of the whole state. Bernie's home state tried this, got voted down. They're trying it in California. Same projections. I think for California, it was 2.5 times. So you're talking about essentially a tax burden 2.5 times, with the promise, and it is essentially a promise that people are going to get better outcomes and better service. And when we've already seen some healthcare promises not come true for people that with the Affordable Care Act was supposed to reduce premiums, not lose your coverage, not lose your doctor, all those things that President Obama, when he went out and campaigned,
did you lose your doctor?
Did I lose my doctor?
Yeah, did
I know
you lose
people
your-
that did. I know the people that did.
I'm pretty
And I know
sure
in
that
Massachusetts,
across the board we've
I know-
increased coverage, increased fairness, and frankly, it's
Well,
not
well,
a perfect system, but
see,
it's certainly a better system.
But see, understand something. If you
Yeah.
pass a law that forces people to buy coverage, of course you'll increase coverage. Now, that's the goalpost that's been moved, but I'm just getting at...
Doing a more humane thing, and we're on the road to a more humane outcome. Will it take 20 years or 10 years? It might take.
I know you think that
Okay.
that maybe forcing healthcare to become more expensive is more humane. I respectfully disagree.
Forcing it to become more expensive.
Of
We
course.
don't agree. We don't agree on some of the premises. So we can agree that we need to talk through it. We can agree that it's going to take some years. But this idea that because it sounds expensive and because we might not want to insure everyone on the right, we can just wash this issue away. The Republican Party has a responsibility to these voters who aren't covered, and the Republican Party is not going to do well in the long term if it is not covering people on basic issues. If we're not assuring the American dream for working families, you can't do well in America as a politician or as a family.
Sure. Well, if you put it in those terms, yes. But I'm going to wrap up with this because I know these guys want to go. Last thing. It should be left to more. I mean, the Massachusetts healthcare. Okay, we actually had a reasonably working system, even though not everybody benefited from it. We nearly covered everybody, and you have situations where states. Again, I'll go back to the education issue. Are more responsive to the citizens of those states. To say that, I guess, to bring it full circle, so to speak. The idea that the federal government getting involved and now mandating all these changes would affect a better outcome that could happen as opposed to different from New York to Massachusetts to California to Arkansas, it doesn't necessarily, it won't work. It won't work as well. And you're seeing the effects of that now.
Okay.
Now,
can I give you my response to that?
Sure.
Or do you want to? I see in a broad-based way, bringing it full circle about all these issues, I see a time of unprecedented disruption, technology disruption, automation, a reduction in wages as jobs get displaced or as wages get decreased due to automation. I see a time where we're going to need to dig deep, and it's going to be hard. We're going to have hard discussions. We're going to have hard discussions about the tax rate, and I hope to God that we're saving money for the middle class and the working class because I think we can. I hope to God that we're investing in the smallest businesses and not the biggest businesses because they employ and have a trajectory of employment that is positive for our economy. And I think we can do all of this in a fairly bipartisan way that focuses on the 90% of Americans who are not being treated fairly by today's politicians. I don't think we have to focus on the same hot-button issues and disagreements that are held up in Congress today, the same roadblocks and the same stagnant issues that have polarized the national conversation. Because I think, frankly, folks in your party and folks in my party are upset that we're talking about some of these things while we could be investing in things that support their transition over the next 20 years.
that's a good candidate answer right there. I gotta commend you for that. I have about 3 more questions.
I thought it was an authentic candidate answer. It wasn't canned.
No.
I just said that because of what we've talked about. And I said that because of what I believe in.
Well, that's good. But the problem is what I'm glad we were able to do is sit down and talk about it in a rational way.
Yeah.
Even though we're probably very far apart on what the agreement is to discuss it, at least the discussion begins, and we don't call each other names. Even though, I'm going to wrap it up, I called Nadeem a neo-communist.
He did. Oh my God!
On Twitter.
How do you fight? How do you fight some of these things? And I'm like, what does that even mean?
Well,
I'm very capitalist.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that based on our conversation thus far. But let me say I will retract that for now.
Oh, thank
and
God.
say,
Thank you so much. I could be reasonable, a little reasonable,
and say Nadeem is a dyed-in-the-wool progressive. I think in all of our talking points. But I'm glad I respect you a lot for sitting down with me today.
Thank you.
And doing that. I honestly
I appreciate it
because there's a lot of those folks who, and I don't mean this as a slur or anything, on the left that won't.
I don't take that as a slur, by the way.
That won't engage in, I think, a rational political discussion about the issues.
I don't know how we got here or how we inherited this situation, but I think we do have to sit down, and I hope we will. And frankly, I hope there's a lot of undecided voters, independents, centrists, even Republicans who might not be registered in the party who say, you know what, I'm going to check out that primary, and I'm not necessarily going to vote because we agree on every single issue. I'm going to vote because of principled candidacy, not just mine. I think there's a lot of folks in the Democratic primary who are going to bring out really exciting conversations with real, authentic leadership potential.
I had many more questions, but we will have to save them until another time.
I hope we do. I hope we talk about capitalism next time, because I'm a fierce protector of capitalism, which has been eroded.
So I would have to. I want to understand what your definition of capitalism might be. So,
yes.
But just on that statement alone, I'll rescind the neo-communist label that I've put upon you, that I've thrust upon you. He is Nadeem Mazen. He's a congressional candidate for Massachusetts 3rd District. His website is what?
VoteNadeem.com. You can also find me at Nadeemtron on Twitter.
Share this with your friends. We are on YouTube. We are on iTunes. We are on SoundCloud. This is the Lincoln Review podcast. We aim to bring intelligence back to our political discourse, and hopefully we've done so today. Nadeem, thank you very much for being on.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Jeff.